Hello, hello, and welcome to the Finding the Unicorn in You podcast. What a beautiful day to inspire lives. My name is JAIME RAYGOZA, your host, and I am so excited to have you here. Let's get ready to meet some fantastic unicorns and learn how to unleash the inner unicorn in you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Finding the Unicorn in You. Today, I have a very special guest. She is a codependency recovery expert and educator who believes in the power of therapy, journaling, and inner child work to facilitate healing. Through her own personal journey, she has awakened her true self and reconnected with her intuition, leading to a newfound sense of worthiness and confidence. She is dedicated to supporting and educating women on how to improve their relationships by focusing on their own self-improvement first. And she also hosts her own very own podcast called Unstuck on You. So if you haven't listened to it, definitely hit the subscribe button there and take a listen to it after this episode. So without further ado, I welcome Lindsay Andrews.
Oh, Jaime, thank you for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and welcome here. I'm super excited to talk to you. So there's so many questions I need to ask you.
Oh, I can't wait to dive in. This is going to be fun.
Let's start off with what led you to this career pathway and this passion of yours?
I think a lot of us in the wellness space, health and wellness and just mental health, it starts for us personally. We're on our own personal journeys. It started for me in childhood. All of my codependent issues originated there, but I didn't really know about it. I didn't really know that it was called codependency until I was around 30 years old. It took me a while to even know what it was. It took me even longer to unpack the layers of codependency. And I just felt passionate about it as one embarks on a healing journey. It's only natural that we really get into the work, from therapy to journaling to reading books on a topic that you're wanting to explore. And then just transitioned into this like a 3-year nudge, so to speak, about starting a podcast about the very topic. It just evolved over time. And I think you probably can attest to this too. It's like all of the small steps add up.
I completely agree. And for listeners that don't really know what codependency is, can
Yeah.
you explain it in your own words?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way I can describe it is codependency is a abandonment of self-neglect. When I say it shows up in childhood, a lot of people might have alcoholism or some drug addiction where a parent is involved. Learn to be overly concerned and caring about that parent who is going through the struggle. That was the case for me. I think living in that environment created this worry and concern outside of myself. I had to, in a sense, grow up a little bit sooner than maybe most kids do. So it was only natural that I was a caretaker. And with my friends, I think my friends, even in high school, I know they did, they'd call me mom. I was worried about them, or I'd get going out drinking. And I'm like, okay, well, be careful. There was a lot of that. And what I learned, I mean, really codependency, if maybe some of the listeners might wonder if they themselves might be codependent. People pleasing seems to be a big quality, a big trait, the inability to say no to others. So again, that self-neglect. You can't say no because you're worried that the relationship might be in jeopardy if you stand up for yourself. You might have childlike fantasies that someone can like actually save or fix your life. Like you're looking again outside of yourself. I would say throughout my life, not just in childhood, but also in my adulthood, I would walk on eggshells a lot around other people who I didn't perceive as maybe safe. I know you can relate to this because I know you've had your own challenges before.
Mhm.
Yeah, just like those are some of the signs, just worrying about what other people think about you all the time, that obsessive thinking. Really, it's just all of your thoughts, all your energy is outside of yourself. And not really, it's like we're trained to think that to think about ourselves and take care of ourselves in this culture is selfish. And it's not. It's not. So, yeah, those are just a few things.
That's great. And I think that was a great definition. And personally, I struggled with this. I'm such a people pleaser. And I also grew up needing to be an adult right away. I grew up in a very low income neighborhood and my family was struggling. My dad was the only one working. My mom was forced to work after a few years of us not being able to make it. And then once I turned 15, they're like, you need to start working as well.
Oh,
So,
wow,
uh,
Jaime. Wow.
yeah, so a big portion of my income came to pay for the mortgage, for the food on the table. So I had this idea ingrained in me that I need to provide for my family. I need to be the caretaker. I need to always be the responsible one. So like you said, in college, And even in high school, I was called the dad in the group because I was always like,
Are
"Are you sure?
you?
Is that like the right plan for you? Is that responsible? How are you doing your finances? Like, I don't know if that's the right idea for you." And even when my friends were getting drunk, I was always the one cleaning the house. I was always the one picking them up, dropping them off. So I didn't feel like I have the pleasure to partake in those same experiences because I had in the back of my head, somebody needs to be responsible. Somebody needs to be the one that needs to take care of everyone. I can't selfishly let loose too much because then who's going to take care of everybody else, let alone myself? So I totally get what you mean. And
Wow, yes, you do. You totally do. And what a big responsibility for such a young person. I mean, that's just wow. As you were talking about it, I was getting this pit in my stomach of like, oh, that feels like a lot.
yeah, it took years of therapy and like internal work for myself to being allowed to do things for myself and not consistently need validation from other people saying, "Is that okay for me to do? Can I do that for me?" From something as small as allowing myself to eat dinner by myself, allowing myself to buy something extra like a pleasure just so that I can enjoy myself and being like, no, I need to save this for in case my family needs it for an emergency fund, or I can't travel across the world by myself because what if something happens and my friend needs me or my mom needs me? So that codependency is so ingrained in us sometimes that we don't realize how much it's there until you actually open your eyes to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's really powerful, and it's fascinating to me to hear your perspective, a totally different situation, yet it had the same effect on both of us,
Mhm.
you know, and how it permeates that, well, I can't give myself this, or I'm not worthy of that, or I got to take care of this other person and make sure they're cared for. Yeah, I mean, I still, if I'm being truly honest, it still comes up. And thank goodness it does, I guess, in a way, because it reminds me of how far I've come in the journey too. Because this takes work. This recovering from codependency does not happen overnight.
Exactly. I truly believe that it's an ongoing work. It's not something that you take a pill and then the next day it's gone. So for you, what are some techniques or some strategies that you've learned to open your eyes when it's happening and then
Yeah.
snap yourself out of it?
I'm exploring with this. I wouldn't say I have it all figured out. And I do want to tell your listeners, while I like to educate and I'm in the podcasting space with a podcast about codependency, I am healing just like every single person here. Some of the things that I might bring up might not work for everyone. I don't think that there's one thing or one, like you said, one pill out there that's going to solve the thing. I think it is an eclectic buffet of things that helps you get out of the thing. And it could be a variety of different things. It could be mindfulness. Like, wow, I'm feeling really dysregulated here. Got some really bad news. God, I feel like I know immediately that it's probably tied to some trauma. Not
Mhm.
because I can't solve the problem. There's something within me that is triggered. So, developed over the last several years a relationship with my inner child. I have a little Lindsay, and the people who know me know that little Lindsay's with me and I talk about her a lot. I ultimately will go to her and I will ask her, "What's going on? Are you okay in there?" Like, the very sometimes not so nice because I'm still learning. I have pictures of her throughout my house so that I can remind myself of the little girl that is inside me and how sweet, delicate, kind, expressive, and beautiful this little girl is. I like to think that. I like to visualize her and come with that visual of her with the issue, with the concern, and with compassion towards her. Because a lot of times when I am dysregulated, it's because she's worried about something. She's
Mhm.
worried that someone's going to leave me or someone's going to think that we're idiots and we're going to lose our jobs or
Mhm.
anything. It's like these things come up, right? The most irrational thoughts will permeate and create this stress response in us. And she can usually tell me what's going on. And then I talk to her like I would be talking to a child to say, I always go back to mom and dad. Mom and dad love you. Because usually it's something to do with some hurt from the
Mhm.
past, some belief that walked away from way back when. I say, Mom and Dad, they love you so much. They really do. We got this thing going on, and wow, yes, your feelings are completely rational. That makes sense why you would be mad or why you would be really worried or anxious about this thing. And then I try to form it in a way that is very supportive to say, hey, yeah, we've look at all these other things that have come up along the way that have been hard. Like, gosh, I went through a divorce 4 years ago. Hell, that was freaking hard. And so it's so quick. She doesn't always remember all those things that we walk through together, even the stuff from long, long ago. We did. We went through it and we're resilient. And we have really unlocked so many beautiful gifts as a result of that stuff.
Mm,
I always start right there because I feel that I can get to it's like direct to the source when stuff comes up. It's she's gonna tell me, and we're gonna figure it out.
I love that. I really do like the fact that you say you have pictures of yourself. I actually don't have a single picture of me on my wall now that I think about it.
My gosh, well, this is a perfect promo opportunity for this podcast. You can put a little photo of yourself. Do you have access to photos when you were a
Yeah.
kid?
Yeah, little me, and I have these silly photos. I think it really shows the innocence and the fun that I used to have as a little boy. So I think that would be a good opportunity for me to put it out there.
You're delightful. Your presence is amazing. I can just imagine you as a child. Just so much life, much excitement. I can just feel that from you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. What you said gave me this analogy that when we are in that little negative space, we're in the feels, in the really bad part in our head where we have the self doubt or the imposter syndrome. You are in a dark room. And what you need to do is really remind myself, what have I gone through and what have I experienced to get here? And like you said, oh, I've gone through a divorce. And then suddenly a little switch turns out in the corner and then you see a little bit of light and you start seeing a path in that room. And then, oh, I've gone through a layoff and another light switch, or I went through a very
Yes.
hard breakup. And you start really seeing, wow, I've accomplished through so much stuff. And the room that was suddenly dark is now full of light, and you see the exit to get yourself out of that headspace and back into your reality. Because we trap ourselves in this little box of negative thoughts, and we need to try to get ourselves out as much as possible. As long as we stay in that box, life seems impossible, and life seems like there's no point to it. And that's where we end up not doing anything, get into depression, severe anxiety, and we need to try to get ourselves out of that box.
I love that analogy. I'm so glad that you shared that with me. I'm going to take that with me. I have tears in my eyes because, quite frankly, we're lighting up that room all on our own. So good. So powerful.
Yeah, and we have to remind ourselves, like you said, looking at that little image, you've gone through so much, and that little kid would be so proud of you because you're doing things that they only imagined you can potentially accomplish.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be fixated on the bad things that you went through. They're going to be fixated on the good things because when you talk to a little kid, they talk about, wow, this is like my hero because of X, Y, and Z. They don't talk about oh, they didn't accomplish the X, this, and this, and
Yeah.
this. You
No, that's a really good point. And one of the things that I like to remind her about is the podcast. I look back on high school and we had a radio station and I did the morning announcements. I did like a lot of cool creative projects and this is like her form of self-expression. It's like as much as I'm like I got to get this message out there, it's also feeding her soul and her creativity as well. So it's like a win-win.
I love that. So tell me more about this podcast. So how did you get started and what made you take that jump and say, I'm just going to do this?
Yeah, yeah, that's a fun story. This is funny, but there was a podcast out. I don't think I know they're not publishing any new episodes and they haven't for a while, but it was called Codependency No More. So like the book Codependent No More and all of the topics were on codependency. And I was struggling at work primarily. I was working for a very challenging individual. And I know you're nodding because you're like, yep, I know what all that means too. And I was just consuming this podcast and I ended up finding my current therapist on the podcast because he was a guest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And he was talking about the concept of self liking, trusting, and loving oneself.
Mm,
And he was basically making a general comment saying, well, if you ask the general population, if they like themselves, most people will answer, yeah, of course I like myself. But when you get underneath all the layers and you start picking it apart, most people don't. They might project they do, but most people, they struggle to like themselves, for
Mhm.
they can't trust themselves and therefore they can't love themselves. And I was like, the light bulbs are going off for me. I was driving into work. I had just gotten out of that awful job and I was working in a really awesome place, but I was still feeling unfulfilled and like something wasn't quite right for me. Started seeing the therapist, learned a lot from him. And in 2019, I decided that I was hearing the nudges then, you need to do a podcast. And I'm like, and I was helping this gentleman out actually that was running the other podcast. I was doing like finding some guests and stuff for him, which was great. So I got enough of my act together to be like, okay, I took a class and I got a microphone and all right, I'm going to do this and recorded one episode and then it sat for 3 years. And every time like I would think about it, I was feeling like I let myself down. I
Mhm.
just was like, why can't I do this? Like, what is the problem? Like, come on, Lindsay. I wasn't being kind and compassionate to myself at all
Mhm.
with that. I had a coach last year and she said to me, what would it take if you just hit the publish button on that podcast? And I was like, well, it probably wouldn't be hard to do. Ended up publishing it and got some really great feedback. I mean, the audio, like the production quality of this thing, like if you go back and listen to episode one of like, whoa, I just kept it up there. It's like we've gotta keep a timestamp on the things
Mhm.
we're doing, and we can't like, "This is me, this is who I am." I'm not gonna, like, delete that just because it sounds a little funky, maybe somebody needs it. So, anyway, I ended up publishing that initial podcast, and then I did 2 more last year. So, I got over the hump in December. I work full-time, by the way, and I had 2 weeks of vacation, and I said, "I'm gonna get this going. I'm gonna do this." It was, like, literally, like, all the light bulbs in the dark room, like, flipped on. I went to a yoga retreat right before this, and it's a woo-woo, winter solstice retreat, and, we ended up writing down all the things that were holding us back. And I wrote down a lot of stuff, a lot of baggage, a lot of stuff I was still holding on to. And then I reframed all of that into what I want to expand. And that podcast just came through so loud and clear. The rest is history. I've been full tilt since January 1 of this year. And it's just been a remarkable journey. It's like, there's no going back. Like, do you feel like that with what you've started?
Yes, yes. I also had such a hard time in wanting to do this, and I was like, "Who's gonna wanna come in my podcast? Who's gonna want to get interviewed by me? Who's gonna listen to this?" Started off with 0 listeners for, like, the first 4 episodes, and I was getting very in my head, and I was like, "Nobody's watching this, no one's watching this." But I said, "My future children, my future family, future generations are gonna be able to have something to get to know me by listening to every single episode and what I've done." And this is, like you said, like a timestamp where back in the day, people used to listen to cassettes of people like singing or talking or things, but now they have like this whole season of me to really get to know me, not just by storytelling, but actually visibly hearing me.
Mhm.
So it's like I'm leaving my legacy this way. So even if no one listens to it today, someone's going to listen to it and have an impact tomorrow. So that made the biggest difference. And that's what got me the motivation to keep doing this. And through perseverance, it started growing and people are lining up to come and interview with me, and I've loved every single chance that I've had to meet someone new and learn from them. It's been such an amazing
Right?
experience.
Yes. It's like the selfishness of wanting to do it because it aids in our own healing journey. It's
Mhm.
like it is accelerated, right? It's like this beautiful gift of like tapping into the wisdom of all the different people that occupy this space and have just some other perspective or angle to kind of shed light on something. Yeah, it's fun, and then I'm sure you've grown so much since your episode 1, so I love
Oh,
it.
Oh, yes. And I'm consistently, when people come up to me with certain issues, I'm always quoting different people that I've had here. And I'm like, where did you learn that? I was like, I learned it from my podcast. I actually like learned it from so and so. You should go check them out. And it's like these little nuggets that stay with you every single time. And it's just so
Yes.
powerful.
Yeah, well said.
So, talking about advice, if you had the opportunity to go back and talk to small Lindsay with the knowledge that you have now, what advice would you give her?
Mm. Mm. Get out and explore. Get out and
Mm.
discover. Do things that scare you.
Hmm.
Don't terrify you, scare you. Absolutely. I feel that the things that we lean into, new experiences, get to our growth edges, if you will, it shows us that we can do it, that we're capable of anything. I know, like, I have like crazy, like, I have like skydiving on my bucket list. I'm like, no, if I'll ever do that. I, in my mind, I think that sounds amazing. Gosh, like it's been on there for several years now. But then I've also been to the Grand Canyon and had exposure to what heights feel like, fear of
Hmm.
heights. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know if I could jump out of an airplane. That would be next level. But maybe take it back a little bit. Maybe I will do it at one point in my life. But yeah, get out there and explore and try new things because most of the time it's not as scary as we think it's going to be.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and you learn so much about yourself and what triggers you and how to get through those type of that fear that you feel inside because you're going to feel that same
Yeah,
fear in other situations that are not so scary. So if you learn how to cope with that one, it'll make everything else a lot easier.
right. I mean, I think the scariest thing that I've done is the podcast. And that imposter syndrome, man, rears its ugly head every single episode. I'm just like, "God." And I always find myself, and as well, it's like we find ourselves on the other end of the podcast, the episode, the recording, and we're like, wow, I just rocked my world. Like, that was amazing. Like, we did that. Like, how cool is that? And ultimately, it's even bigger than that. I wrote an affirmation when I said that winter solstice thing that I did.
Hmm.
I wrote an affirmation and I will share it to you. It's a little hodgepodgey, but it says, take action, keep going. When I honor the podcast, I heal myself. And interviewing, publishing, and repeat, like basically interview, publish, repeat was like my mantra for the year.
Hmm.
And that is the path to healing. And it's a focus on serving other people. It's been a very good advice for me over and over again about taking the leaps of faith, getting uncomfortable just enough so that we can stretch ourselves and see what we're made of. See where it takes us, right?
Exactly.
So many years I did not do these things. Let me just tell you. So many years. My mouth was shut. It was like, I can't even say it. I was like worried about everybody else and their opinion. I'd like to have a conversation. So I'm a podcaster and you are too. So I'm like turning the tide on asking questions for you too. But like I have had some body issues too. I've had irritable bowel. I had a consistent chronic cough over the
Hmm.
years. Those are psychosomatic symptoms to get the stress in my body. Doing the podcast is definitely part of when I say path to healing, that is me communicating, me cleansing my insides to feel better. About you, do you struggle with it? And I don't know if you get into that on your show or not.
Yeah, definitely. Every episode is an imposter syndrome, especially when I meet someone new
Yeah.
with the different areas expertise, especially something that I'm not too familiar with. I'm like, ooh, should I do all this research? Should I not do this research? Should I go in blindly? Should I not? What if they think I'm not like adequate enough? Like, are they going to just get disappointed? So all these different ideas get in your head and you're like, what? Just have to rip up the band-aid, just do it. And I really like your mantra: interview, record, repeat,
Yes.
and just do
Yes.
it. I love that. I think I'm gonna have to write that up
Don't
every
even
time.
all the other stuff doesn't even matter. It's like, "Oh, yeah, just do that. Okay, cool."
Exactly. But yeah, I have this chronic cough and I always mute myself when I do it too. And all the other health stuff that happens. But even with that, have seen it decrease because my anxiety levels have been going down. The more I do this, I think in a sense it is a little bit of exposure therapy.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's so cool to hear that you are.
I've loved this experience. So what would you say, because you mentioned a little bit about challenges and a little bit before, would be your biggest challenge or transition that you've faced thus far?
I mean, it's multi-layered. I think you've probably witnessed so far that, like, nothing is really like a concise answer. I guess I'll just go with what came to my mind immediately, which was my divorce. That was one of the hardest things and yet one of the easier things too that I've done. And
Mhm.
that sounds strange, but yeah, I would say I went through a phase before we decided to separate where I had a recognition that things I was neglecting myself for a very long time and that I didn't prioritize myself in the relationship. And it was that coming to awareness and seeing where I just didn't feel like I was on like an equal playing field. It created like, oh, yeah, this isn't right. This is probably not going to work because I'm finally starting to ask myself important questions about, is this what I want? Is this a relationship that can last another 20 years? Do I want it to last another 20 years? And then I also have two children, and
Mm.
they're amazing, wonderful humans. And I had to rewrite what I felt like what I was hearing from people about, well, divorce, you don't want your kids to be from a broken home and all these things. And I even had some of that worry and anxiety about what trauma was I imparting on them by this decision. I would say that my ex husband and I are a success story. Nothing's perfect, but we did figure out how to prioritize our kids and end our relationship in a successful way. I think that we're both better off. And I think that because we've always been good friends, we've been able to really be great at co parenting. And I think that was maybe the hardest thing I've gone through, the most challenging thing that I've had to go through as an adult, and to recognize at that point that I was a single mother after that. That opened up a whole new dimension of healing and learning about myself and what I'm capable of. I have used it as an opportunity to get to know myself and to also build deeper relationships with my kids. So for that, I'm grateful.
I think what happens is that you're in a different place now, in a better place, that it may not be a challenge now versus back then it might have been a challenge.
Yeah, it was one of the hardest things, and I still struggle with that when I need to bring something to someone's attention, like, let's have a conversation about a divorce, or I'm having a problem with a friendship or at work. Sometimes being able to use my voice and saying, I'm so used to just saying, "Oh, they didn't mean that. I'm going to be okay." And I don't do that anymore. If I have a concern or feel like something is not been addressed or dealt with, or I feel like my boundary has been violated. Now it takes a whole hell of a lot right now because I'm still in that space of really working that voice, but I know that I just can't let it lie anymore. I
Mhm,
have to use my voice. I have to speak up. I would say, now there's just these mini challenges that come
mhm.
up that say, "Well, are you sure about that? Did you really heal from that?" And just want to make sure. I'm going to give you a little lesson, just making sure that you got that one, and we can move on to the next thing that we're going to work on.
No, I totally get that, and it's a big transition, especially spending your life and creating memories and journeys with an individual and then not having them in that same capacity is a big shift, and I think it goes with your podcast too. Sometimes we do create somewhat of a codependency. It's almost impossible not to when you live with someone for such a long time and
Yeah.
you share a life together because you get used to them doing stuff for you or you doing stuff for them or certain routines and things of that nature, which is natural, especially when you're trying to create a life with someone. You have to be vulnerable in that sense. And suddenly that identity is like, who am I now? Like relearn that. Sometimes we do lose ourselves in relationships and whether it be platonic or romantic, sometimes we give pieces of ourselves that we should have never given in the first place. And I think that's when we need to reflect and being like, how do I get that back? Or can I get it back? And do I need it back? Or am I this new person? And do I need to move forward from there and then add on to this? new version of myself.
You've been doing some work on your own too, I can tell.
Oh yeah. But thank you for sharing that. And if someone is out there listening to this and they're just getting started with the divorcing process, what advice would you give them?
I would say get a coach. I'm a huge advocate of there are so many specialized coaches out there. Maybe your therapist is also someone that can help guide you through that process. I would not have been able to do it without guidance and reassurance every step of the way. That would be my recommendation because those people are experts as to what typically happens, when should things happen, all of the dynamics related to kids and finances and co-parenting and all those things. So that would be my suggestion.
Yes. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people want to do it on their own and they feel that they're weak if they have to seek out for help. But it takes an extreme amount of courage, bravery, and vulnerability to say, why struggle if I can just do this with someone else and help me make my life a little bit easier? There's no reason it doesn't make you a better person if you put yourself through it alone and struggle to do it.
It is an interesting space to be in going through a divorce. I remember just sharing with maybe one or two people that this was going on. I didn't communicate. And I think it's because all of his friends are my friends and we're married a very long time. We were married 18 years. That's why I recommend like an impartial third party because they can see things differently. They're not wrapped up in stories that they know about the other person or whatever. They can just look at things very pragmatically. Looking back, I remember it feeling isolating and seeing that maybe I had brought more of my circle in because that support is helpful. As a reflection here, could have been a little more support that others could have given me so that they felt like they were supporting me because they love and care about me.
I think just reaching out to someone is an important piece of no matter what struggle, because doing it by yourselves is really hard. Earlier in the season, somebody said, we are jars trying to figure out life, but we can't read our own label. So you need someone to look at our label for us and tell us what we're going through because we are so inside that we can't get out of it.
That is so good. Man, you're getting some notes over there. Man, I want to talk to the jar person. Cool. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's so true. It is so true. And I think as a culture, Western society, I don't, this is a new thought I've been thinking about, but other cultures, they dance, they sing, their communities show up for them and wrap arms around them. And here in the United States, it's like, okay, well, good luck to you. It's praise is awarded to that person who puts 200 pounds on their backpack and tries to go up a mountain by themselves. It's like, come on. Like, I mean, nobody's waiting for you when you get up there. I'm right into that space of community is everything. How do we bring community back to this country? And what's wonderful too is that we have such diversity in our country. Hopefully, we can learn from other cultures that have those beautiful things and be able to adopt them. We're human beings and we require that to live a full and happy life.
I agree. I agree 1,000%. And we learn from different people. And it doesn't matter where they're from, how old they are, or what their background is, where there's something we could always learn from somebody else.
Yes.
And as we're wrapping up, I know it's been such a fantastic conversation. I don't want to stop, but I have to. As we're wrapping up, the last question for you, and this is the whole theme of the unicorn journey. What key factors, in your opinion, helps an ordinary person transform into a unicorn that helps them stand out?
A relationship to yourself, an inner knowing, looking within, asking the questions. Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I living the life that I want to live? Am I leaving a legacy? Am I in connection with others? Am I present? I really don't think that we can do and be in relationship and do the work that we need to do in society, in the healing space, without spending time with ourselves. That takes work and that takes self compassion. And it also takes forgiveness. That's my main mantra with starting the podcast and getting into the space is that we want people to be able to discover who they are so then they can be who they're meant to be. Yeah.
I love that. Self-discovery is so important and self-work. You're the one living with yourself, with these
Yes.
emotions, with these feelings. So you need to handle it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's sure been a pleasure talking with you. I really have appreciated all of your reflections. Thank you for the wonderful and engaging conversation.
Likewise, and you've given so much good advice, and I appreciate you so much. And like I said, you have your own podcast. So if you're listening, make sure that you listen to it. And I'll leave everything in the show notes. But if someone does want to get in contact with you or has questions for you or just wants to listen to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can just go right to my website. It's called unstuckonyou.com. It's super simple. So it's all you got to remember. And you can find the podcast there. I'm also on all the streaming, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those places too. And I'm on Instagram. Feel free to DM me. I would love to touch base with you and see how I can help.
Awesome. And I'll leave all of that in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can just click on it and go directly to her website.
Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you. But thank you once again for taking the time to come here. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who's listening, make sure to leave us a 5-star review so this message can get pushed out to so many more people. And episodes come out every Friday at 7 a.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you.